morning. I'm Lauren Granada, and this is NBC5 In Depth. The Vermont legislature will head back to work at the State House this week after a week off for town meeting day. One of the bills being looked at is the Omnibus Public Safety Bill, presented by Governor Phil Scott's administration last week. The bill specifically looks at rules surrounding bail revocation. It also increases and would increase potential punishment for older kids and young adults. Because the bill was presented later in the session, it will not be voted on this year. But as you'll hear, the bill covers issues Vermonters are facing right now that continue to be discussed. We sat down with Vermont's Commissioner of Public Safety, Jen Morrison, and Tucker Jones, the Assistant General Counsel with the Department of Public Safety, to explain why they think Vermont needs this right now.
You know, we spend a lot of time in different communities all over the state, every corner of the state. We monitor when communities hold public safety forums. We receive emails. We talk with police chiefs and all sorts of practitioners in the field and our colleagues in the Agency of Human Services. And what we're hearing is that the community is tired of an apparent lack of accountability for people who commit serious crimes or for people who continually commit lower level crimes with impunity, people who continually violate their conditions of release. So that's one of the things. We also, you know, we heard a lot this year about people not feeling safe in their communities, their downtowns, their parks, their recreational spaces. And people are tired of feeling like they can't go and enjoy the places in their community that they used to. We hear a lot of concerns about profiteers who come from out of state to prey on our most vulnerable, specifically those who are engaged in drug trafficking and the associated violent crime that comes with drug trafficking. And indeed, we've seen an uptick in gun violence and in our homicide rates. And so, you know, really at the end of the day, what we've heard is that it appears that a pendulum has swung too far, away from considering the good of the collective, the social contract, the community good, and way too far towards individual rights without regard for victim safety, public safety, and the ability of the community to be healthy.
We've seen about a 40% increase in aggravated assaults during the same time frame. So these special meetings that communities are having are in response to a real issue, which is this increase in crime. Now, one of the main issues that we're seeing as a theme from these meetings, as the commissioner was referencing, was this ongoing criminal behavior that doesn't effectively end when courts get involved. So people will be charged for their first crime, then they'll be released, and then they'll commit another crime, and then they'll be released by the court again. And this can happen dozens of times. And that is a real pressure point, I think, from the frustration from the communities. One of the proposals in this package is to attempt to create greater clarity regarding the circumstances in which someone's bail should be revoked when they continually commit crimes over and over again, are released on conditions but don't abide by those court-ordered conditions of release. So that's one of the efforts to directly address the frustrations that we're experiencing from the community that are rooted in real cases. We have cases, you know, not just in Chittenden County, but around the state with individuals who are in this circumstance where they have hundreds or thousands of law enforcement contacts, but they are continuing to commit crimes. The courts are not effectively able to stop them from committing crimes. So at a certain point, we need to consider at what point someone's bail should be revoked in that circumstance. That's part of the effort here, is to ask the legislature to give some scrutiny to those circumstances and some greater clarity on when someone's bail should be revoked.
A lot of people talk about tackling the issue from the root of it, and that starts from having services and having resources to first be able to address kind of the continued crime and where that comes from.
Sure.
Can you talk about how this bill addresses that?
Sure. So let me say this. You're not going to hear anyone on our team talk about a return to being tough on crime. We recognize that we cannot enforce our way out of the current situation. We recognize that people's behavior, the problems that are being created in communities, whether they are criminal or just antisocial and disturbing, may be driven from a lot of different places, primarily through untreated or not well treated mental health problems or substance use disorder. It is essential that we address the root cause of the behavior, but we can no longer take a pass on behaviors and chalk it up to, oh, it's related to mental health. That's what the community is saying. That's what we're hearing loud and clear is, we don't care what's driving the behavior, just make it stop. So we have to invest in appropriate levels of treatment for people, but we also need to build in a framework of accountability that they have to engage with the service if their behavior continues to be criminal. So part of this omnibus bill is spearheaded by the Agency of Human Services, and it involves bringing more treatment beds into the community that can be used for co-occurring disorders. So someone with a substance use disorder who also has an underlying mental health issue. Currently right now, they sort of have to walk two paths, one in the mental health world, one in the substance use space. They are proposing as part of this omnibus bill that those beds could be used to treat both, bring those streams of treatment together, make it easier for the person to get the help that they need, and also provide a much broader range of levels of care for people with persistent problems that then result in these behaviors. I can tell you that we think about this, all of this, from the intersection of public health and public safety. We cannot have safe communities if our people are not healthy. Healthy people have stronger families. Stronger families lead to stronger, more successful schools. Stronger schools lead to people better prepared for solid employment. I mean, everything is interconnected. Like everything between public health and public safety is completely interconnected. But what seems to have happened in the last few years is that there became this chasm, this rip in the fabric of society, where if someone said your behavior, your offending or criminal behavior is driven by mental health or substance use disorder, then they were just given a pass. There's no accountability. And we're proposing to stitch that fabric of the community back together and build a framework that meets people's needs, meets them where they are, but also requires them to become healthier and to stop the behaviors that got them there. We think about this, all of this, from the intersection of public health and public safety. We cannot have safe communities if our people are not healthy. Healthy people have stronger families. Stronger families lead to stronger, more successful schools. Stronger schools lead to people better prepared for solid employment. I mean, everything is interconnected. Like everything between public health and public safety is completely interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, there's some recognition about the truth of these concerns. There's some recognition that indeed, like these other jurisdictions, Vermont has experienced this increase in crime over the pandemic. It's hard to ignore the communities that are having these special meetings on the topic of public safety. It is clear that some of these issues that we're outlining here are not just anomalies that can be easily brushed aside and hope that they go away. And so as a result, there is some genuine engagement from the legislature and from the stakeholders on trying to tackle these topics in a coherent and effective way that's actually going to make a difference.
Commissioner, what is your message to all of our neighbors in Vermont and the communities who have repeatedly expressed concern over the last several years about increasing crime? What's your message to them today?
My message to them is it's time to do your part. It's time to talk to your elected officials, because there are still legislators in Montpelier who don't believe that crime has risen in Vermont. It is time for you to take the extra step to contact your elected officials, to tell them you're concerned about this, to tell them that you support the governor's omnibus bill for public safety, and keep the pressure up. Because as I said, we're not looking for a big pendulum swing. It has swung too far to one side. We're trying to bring things back to the middle to create stronger, healthier, more vibrant communities that are safe and healthy for everyone to enjoy. And if that message resonates with you, then I would ask that you contact your senators and your elected representatives.
We also spoke with the chair of the House Judiciary Committee and Chittenden County State Representative Martin Lalone, who supports some aspects of this omnibus bill but says it won't solve all of Vermont's public safety issues. Take a listen.
So I understand from the administration they've talked about wanting to fix the systems, but as well as fund the systems. And it's really the funding and resources for the criminal justice system that I think is the number one thing that we need to do. And I'm happy to expand on that as well.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so we've been working on this for the last couple of years at least. We started hearing from Vermonters last biennium that there was a lot of concern about public safety. There were crime rates that were increasing, a lot of nuisance crimes like trespass and retail theft, but also very serious crimes, including murder. So we understood this was definitely an issue we needed to tackle. And we looked at how best to do that. And we don't figure this out ourselves. You know, I'm a citizen legislator. I happen to have a law degree, but I've not been in criminal law. So we go out to the experts. We ask in prosecutors. We hear from defense attorneys, victim advocates, restorative justice providers, and the courts, and to really understand what can we do to address this issue. And the bottom line, what we found out is the number one issue is that the courts are not processing cases fast enough. So really the main ways that you can deter crime, and that's what we want to do, is to have a high risk of being caught, which means having more law enforcement, and we definitely need more law enforcement in the state. Lots of, Burlington is down a number of officers, state police are down 40 or more officers. So that's one thing we definitely need. But the second really important part is having swift and certain consequences. And that means having the courts have the consequences and accountability close to when the behaviors happened. If there's a long time between that, it doesn't have the deterrent effect. And what we found is after, really even before the COVID pandemic, the courts were not being properly resourced, the prosecutors, the defense counsel, and they were already falling behind. And when the COVID pandemic hit and the courts shut down for a while, became even more swamped with cases. So there's a backlog of cases which is leading to cases not being processed quickly enough. There's not quick enough consequences. So we really looked and worked with all those entities to figure out where do we need to put our resources. And we did provide significant additional resources last year for prosecutors, for defense counsel, 3 new judges plus additional staff in the courts. And we also passed some important bills to set up some other issues, such as what's called pre-charge diversion, where we would be diverting cases from the overburdened court system. So that's really, I think, the number one thing we need to do is get our courts working so that people's behavior will have pretty quick consequences.
The omnibus bill is obviously very extensive. What do you hope to see come of this bill eventually when it is revisited?
Well, again, we are looking at the different parts of it and are addressing the issues that are in that bill because we knew it was coming and we knew some of the things that were going to be in there. We got a head start because our session is only a little over 4 months. And in fact, next week, when we get back is what's called crossover week, where we have to have all of our bills done and sent to the Senate. And we just received the omnibus bill and would not have been able to deal with it. So we've been taking pieces. I have a bill that I'm scheduled to take up next week that looks at what's called bail revocation, which is another component of the omnibus bill. It's not that interesting. Well, it is kind of interesting, certainly for a lot of people, but it's a very short component of that bill. It's at page 86, I believe. Right now, public inebriates can be taken to the Department of Corrections. People who are really are inebriated beyond being able to really even almost stand up and such. It's like, where do you take somebody like that? And the Department of Corrections accepts those, but there's a law that changes on July 1st that says they no longer accept them, which means these individuals will end up in our ERs, which they don't have the capacity for that. So this one little section would extend for another couple years having Department of Corrections involved. So I have a plan for how to put that in place. There are other components that Senate Judiciary, I work very closely with my counterpart in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's decided to take some parts, like I mentioned, sealing and expungement, which is probably half of that bill is language related to that. And also is taking on a definition of recidivism. We're taking on bail. We're taking on the raise the age. So most of the stuff will be dealt with in that bill. Not everything. There's a couple things that I don't see advancing, but most of the issues we're trying to address that are in that bill.